Hello. So, a couple days ago, read several newsletters online, and one of them will pop up a This Day in History at the bottom, which is always a little interesting to read. So, a couple days ago, they had This Day in History, August 4th, 1790. U.S. Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton establishes the Revenue Marine Service, which became the U.S. Coast Guard. Of course, first thing that jumped to my mind was the Secretary of the Treasury doesn't have the ability to create a what eventually became a military group. Now, obviously, then, so was this what actually happened, or was just poorly phrased for this little thing? So he looked it up, and it was just poorly phrased. So here's what really happened. Congress created this under Alexander Hamilton's request or his proposal. So yes, it did go through the full congressional requirements to become law. What was happening was we were collecting tariffs, which is the way we're supposed to be funded according to the Constitution, and people were smuggling. So they created, let's make this bill to create some ships to police the smugglers, basically. It was later named, let's see, July 31st, 1894. It was renamed the Revenue Cutter Service. And that's because they made tin cutters, which is a type of boat or ship. Each cutter was assigned, there was also a pay assigned for a master, 3-man crew, 8 mariners, and 2 boys for each ship. These were distributed along the East Coast, various ports. And and this was our maritime force for a while, because after the Revolutionary War, the Navy had been disbanded. So this was it for a while. Then in 1798, we started the quasi-war with France. It's something we almost never hear about in school. Going to do a little research into that and probably do a future video on it, just because, again, this is one of those things we never hear about in school. And Navy was reestablished. The Revenue Cutter Service sailed along with the Navy. The Navy was given authority over them, but they were still a separate group. Let's just say the Navy was calling the shots and everything that was going on. That's probably the best way to put that. And so we had this little 3-year quasi-war with France in which they served. And then the Navy was left. It was not disbanded after that. Interestingly enough, the fact that the Navy was disbanded was interesting, because that is, under the Constitution, the Navy is one of the branches of the armed services which is allowed to be permanent. And that was largely because our borders were mostly water, or the borders most likely to be invaded by a force with the same technologies of ours was water. But they had disbanded the Navy. Army, we're allowed to have an army, but a standing army we are not allowed to have. It is supposed to be renewed every 2 years by Congress, according to the Constitution. Do we actually do that now, or do we just consider it a standing army? I don't know. We'd have to. That would be another study altogether. So we jump forward in time again to January 28th, 1915. Another act is signed by Congress to combine the Revenue Cutter Service with the U.S. Life Saving Service. Wilson signs it into law, and it becomes the Coast Guard. Later on, let's see, in 1939, the U.S. Lighthouse Service is not so much merged with it, as just their functions are taken over by the Coast Guard. And in 1946, the Bureau of Maritime Inspections and Navigations is also merged with it. That's where we get our modern day Coast Guard. That's really it. Like I said, I saw this thing where it looked like the Secretary of the Treasury was creating a military body, and I got curious about it. Looked up some facts. Only other thing of interest is that it is, during peacetime, it is under the jurisdiction of Homeland Security. During war, it is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Defense. So the jurisdiction of the Coast Guard goes back and forth depending on whether we're at war or peace. So that's it. Like I said, got curious about whether Alexander Hamilton actually created this or whether he just proposed it. And it turns out he just proposed it and Congress agreed with him that we needed it. So it does exist legally or constitutionally. And that's all I have. Short video today. Have a nice day.